Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the She Trucking Expo. I'm going to start off with talking about the future of trucking, but you can't talk about the future of trucking without talking about the past. And one thing I can tell you is that the past, trucking wouldn't look like this. So let me give you a little bit of history about myself. I started off in this industry when I was a little kid, 11 years old, believe it or not. My favorite thing to do in class was not pay attention, but to draw trucks on a piece of paper. And I remember one of my best friends made fun of me and said, "Hey, man, you must really love trucks." I'm like, "Man, I'm from Alkaloo, South Carolina. What do you expect?" So fast forward into right around when I graduated high school, I was going through a lot of things. I lost my mother at a very early age. I lost my mother at 11 years old, y'all. And then I fast forward and I moved into college. When I got to college, I was always struggling what I really wanted to do because trucking was always in the back of my mind, but trucking wasn't cool. It was never cool to be in trucking. It was always something that you just had to do if you had to make something happen. So let's talk about the past a little bit. Trucking was never cool, y'all. But to me, it was. It was cool enough to me to want to do it even further. So when I got in college, I wanted to be a computer science engineer. I love technology. But my very first class, it was a physics class. And I bombed it. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to have to do something different. My sophomore year in college, right between my freshman and sophomore year, my father passed away. So I dealt with a tremendous bout of depression. But one of the things I can tell you what trucking literally did to me, trucking actually saved my life. Because I remember when I got my CDL, I went to Schneider, which is back there. I'm going to keep it quiet, but Schneider's back there. That was my first job, right? And they were paying me 23 and a half cents a mile. And when I see people saying there ain't no money in trucking right now, how about go back when I started, right? So he was paying 23 cents a mile, and I was thinking to myself, I was just happy. I was going up and down the highway, going through the mountains, listening to my music. I was in my safe place. I recovered from a mental standpoint. Mental illness and mental health is very important. So I was able to excel out of that. Fast forward a couple years later, I was an owner-operator at 23. I bought my first truck then, but what was missing was there was no education. Everything I did, I had to stumble upon. I made my first million before I turned 30, but I also lost it at the same time because I didn't have the literacy. So when I think about the future of trucking, one of the first things I think about education. When you look around you in this room, it is full of education. And I did my part, y'all. I got here early. I got here about 9. I was supposed to be here yesterday. I told Sheree I was going to be here yesterday, and she called me, and I didn't show up. I'm sorry, Sheree. But when I walked around and I looked at all these vendors and looking at all these things that are here, it's some really good information here. So the very first word I want to think about when I think about the future, I think about education and how important it is. When I started, there was no education. My education was at a truck stop and listening to people talk. My education was failing. My education was going through things that I shouldn't have gone through at that age. I didn't have a platform. So I tell people all the time, even to this day. So I'm the founder and managing director of Innovative Logistics Group. We're a consulting firm, and one of the things that we do is we're empowered through education and we provide resources. One of the things I tell all of our clients that prospect with us, who always worry about the cost of consultation, always worry about the cost of preventative maintenance, one of the things I always tell people is I'd rather pay up front to avoid a roadblock than have to pay for the repairs down the road that I should have known and I should have seen before. So it's really important to get ahead of those things. So that's the first thing when I think about the future of trucking is the availability and the abundance of education. You got to take advantage of that. The second thing I think about empowerment, right? So when I first started driving, and I think this is the dopest thing, women didn't run the industry. Women weren't even behind the wheel. It was a shock to see a woman as a truck driver back then, and now we got so many women that are bosses. That is so inspiring. So when I think about the future of trucking is here. It's already here, and we got to continue to move it forward. So I think about the education point. And number 3, and one of the things that a lot of people avoid in this industry is the technology, right? So technology is one of the things that lag in this industry. So when I think about the ELDs, so just a few months ago, I literally, with my own eyes, on a TV screen, watched a spaceship with a real person and it almost go up to the moon on a commercial flight. It's the first time it's ever happened. They made history. But I also, 3-4 years ago, find ELDs just starting to gain traction in the trucking industry. That's the electronic logging device, for those who don't know what that is. Black boxes existed in airplanes since the 1970s, and we just started to get electronic tracking devices. So technology, embracing technology is super important. Myself and my partners, Pierre and Marcus Jones, we got together and said, you know what, technology is a huge gap. So people always talk right now about the fact that we are having a driver shortage. So I'm going to give y'all a really, really big secret. You can't tell anybody I said this. There is no driver shortage. When I first started driving a truck, there was a driver shortage. There was a driver shortage 5 years later. There was a driver shortage 10 years later. There was a driver shortage 15 years later. There was a driver shortage 20 years later, and they're going to always tell you it's a driver shortage. God didn't wake up this morning and say, you know what, I'm going to stop making truck drivers. I'm going to make them do something else. There is no driver shortage. There's a shortage of resources available. There's a shortage of education, and there's a shortage of things that make people want to be a truck driver. Truck driving is not cool anymore, and it's time for that to change. If you go back into schools, and I remember when I was in high school, remember I was in college, there wasn't truck companies coming out of school to be recruiters, but you know who was? United States Air Force, United States Army, United States Marine. There was all kind of sprint companies. And you know what? When I got to college, you know what else they did? It was all these credit card companies that would come to set up and tell you, hey, you know what? Get a credit card and now go into debt for the rest of your life. Trucking needs to be cool. So we started Next Gen, and I'm going to tell you a little bit of something about Next Gen before we get to, before my time wraps up. So when I first started driving a truck and I went through trucking school, I got my CDL in 21 days because I was ahead of my class. I was a nerd, so I love trucking. I'm going to talk a little bit fast because I want you to keep up with me. So I started off doing that. But when I did it, we had a manual that thick. It had loose leaf paper. You flipped it over and all that good stuff, right? So fast forward to the year 2020, and guess what happened? We had a pandemic, and they told us there was no way that truck drivers can go through training because they couldn't do it physically, right? So myself, my brother Pierre, my brother Marcus, we got together and we said, man, we love trucking so much, we got to make this thing stop. So I want to talk about the future of trucking, and I'm going to talk about it right now. So we got together and said, let's figure out something. So one of the things we talked about is that, you know, how easy can we make it? How can we make it pandemic proof? How can we make sure there was a constant flow of drivers that are going into the industry? Well, guess what? I love video games. I don't play them much anymore because I don't have time. I'm trying to run 3 companies at one time, but can't do it. So there was one game that I always played. It was called Hard Truck Simulator. You can Google it if you want to. It's pretty cool. So what we did was like, you know what? It'd be kind of easy and kind of cool if we make it virtual reality, right? So we decided to start a virtual reality platform, which is a hybrid platform. We wanted to make it pandemic proof. One thing that we learned during this pandemic, we learned how to do things differently. The country moved so much forward. Let me tell you something. Zoom was here long before COVID hit. But then all of a sudden, everybody, whoa, Zoom, Zoom, Zoom. So what we did is we decided to come with a hybrid platform to where you're going to be able to get your CDL in your living room. You're going to be able to get your CDL in your kitchen because a lot of those principles upon driving are conceptual and not necessarily physical. That's the future of trucking. So that's when I think about the future of trucking, it's time to change. It's time for us to stop doing the things the same way we always done them. The pay is always something that you talk about as the future of trucking, but we're still paying by the mile. I saw an example a couple of hours ago by a company that had a multi-level pay structure with incorporated putting teams, and I thought that was so innovative, pardon the pun, but I thought it was so innovative. That's a different way to attract people. And I'm going to tell you, the last thing I'm going to tell you is that in order to move forward in the future of trucking, you have to innovate. You can't do the same things over and over again. Stop with your $5,000 sign-on bonus. Nobody wants to drive for that. Stop saying that we're going to pay 25% on the pay. Nobody wants to do that. You got to be much more innovative. Let's start with some hourly pay to make sure your drivers are getting compensated correctly. If you've never got behind the wheel of a truck, I encourage you to get in a booster seat with your drivers and see what it's actually like. Because I'm going to tell you something from a driver perspective who put in over 1 million miles of driving and doing that by myself. Could you imagine living out of the seat? Could you imagine living behind the wheel of a truck? Can you imagine having to go to things that Brittany was just talking about? You probably can't. So we need to compensate because of that. Because I'm going to tell you, out there is a different world. So when I think about the future of trucking, part of it is empowerment, part of it is education, and the rest of it is innovation. My name is Adam Wingfield. If you want to find me, Innovative Logistics Group. Inno Portal is one of the tech companies that we just started. Next Gen as well. You can find me on Instagram at Innovative Logistics Group. Follow us and also visit our website, www.innovativelegisticsgroupllc.com. Thank you. Welcome. Enjoy. Get the education. Don't take it for granted. Don't put your heads down. Put your phones down for a second and learn something, because this is what's going to change trucking, is when you educate, empower, and innovate. Thank you.
Oh, ladies and gentlemen.